Grandmaster in the Champions Chess Tour, and now he awaits the winner of this match between Vladimir Fedoseev and Magnus Carlsen, and we are off in Game 4.
We're off, and Fedoseev needs to strike. It's a must-win game for him, David. He starts with the white pieces. It's a Nimzo. Take it away.
That's a Nimzo Indian defense where black brings out the bishop very early, and now Magnus challenging for the center. White's last move, putting the queen on the c2 square, isn't regarded as the most ambitious, the most kind of aggressive line. This is more positional, so a bit of a surprise there. And a trade of pawns in the center. We're heading back towards one of those Carlsbad type structures, and it looks like a mishmash, I was going to say, between the Nimzo Indian and the Queen's Gambit declined. And there we go, the white bishop just exerting pressure now along this diagonal, an awkward pin. Will Magnus break the pin? That's the big question. If he does, he would do that with the move pawn to g5, but that would be risky in a situation he just needs a draw. Robert, do you have any experience in this exact position? If so, do you think this is a good opening choice by Fedoseev?
I think it is. I think this type of position is definitely up his alley, something he enjoys. And look at Magnus. He understands what's called for. Not often do we enjoy bringing our knight out in front of the pawns, but this is the trendy main line where black goes after this bishop on g3, pawn to h4, threatens to more or less trap that bishop. It can go forward to e5, but you capture it. And if you save this bishop by pushing h-pawn yourself up to h4, then the black knight jumps into e4. So I have seen this opening a number of times. It's a very tricky line. I think it's a bit too forcing, though, and that's going to be the problem for Vladimir. It doesn't create complications in a way that are more difficult for Magnus to navigate. And you see Magnus, he kind of has like a frown on his face for a second, but I think it's just because he's uncomfortable in his chair, not in the position. Tanya, I think we're seeing knight e4 next from Magnus.
We're going to see the knight jump onto e4 and then the bishop land on f5. Right now, white needs to answer the question with that bishop on g3 hanging. You really don't want to recapture with the f-pawn, opening up the e-file, the e3 weakness. He falls back with the bishop. Now, black has the opportunity for Magnus. He can jump on with bishop f5, lining up the bishop and the knight and the queen with potential ideas of discovered attacks. And I think for white, you've got to develop that bishop from f1 on d3 if black was to play bishop f5, David.
Fully agree. White is actually behind in development now. White has just been messing around with this bishop. It's moved several times. White's queen, a bit of a target, as you indicated, Tanya. But on the bright side, you've provoked the black pawns forward. Black's never going to feel entirely safe with the king in the center or on the king side. And Magnus, in the meantime, a bit of a mysterious move, I'm going to say. Is he lining up some tactics against the white king, potentially in the center? Black's pieces flying out of the traps here. Black's bishop wants to move, as you mentioned. Black wants to castle on the queen side, as Magnus did successfully in an earlier game. But yeah, this is chaotic. And I was skeptical at first, I've got to say. This solid opening choice from Fedoseev, but it's really come to life. Magnus is not backed down from the fight here. And suddenly, Black's pawn structure might well be ruined in the next few turns. I just wonder where the black king is going to go. Where's the white king going to go? Kind of lined up all directions, all these pieces against it. This is a fiery, really promising start to this game, Robert. Already, I see so many tactics in the air. I guess you do too.
Oh, it's going to be a fun battle for these two, but they still are within the realm of some predecessor games. In fact, Yu Yangyi, the Super Grandmaster from China, played against Grigory Oparin, who is a very powerful player in his own right and a renowned theoretician. So the bishop went out to b5 in this game, a little bit more aggressive. I mean, there are a lot of loose pieces, in particular the knight on c6 and then the white knight on c3. So yeah, there are tactics in the air for sure. It looks scary for both sides. There's also pawn tension between h4 and g5 at any moment. One of those pawns can be captured. So I am going to pass. I'm just going to talk about all these ideas and say it's wild. Tanya, I mean, this looks scary for both, but I think maybe a little scarier for white.
Absolutely agree, especially with that last move, bishop f5. We've been talking about this, and I just want to point out one of the tactics that are possible. We mentioned that white wants that bishop on d3 when black plays bishop f5. But now that Magnus has a queen on e7, if you play bishop d3, actually unpinning that knight on c6, there might be big tactics. Knight takes d4 is the first move that comes to mind. You want to open up e takes d4. The queen on e7 is suddenly the power piece. Knight takes c3. Maybe there are better checks in the position, but knight c3 looks like it would be game over. So in fact, Fedoseev does not have the option to counter this last move by Magnus with retreating his own bishop. But David, if that's not on the table, how are you fighting the threat of a knight jump? Fedoseev doesn't care.
He literally doesn't care. He plays the move knight to e2. And wow, this is a big, high responsibility move. I guess the idea, just before we move away from the analysis, is if knight to g3, which looks really strong, double attack against the white queen and against this rook in the corner, then white will take off this knight. And if you recapture, the white queen jumps out and it's counterattack time. Remember, this knight is hanging. If you take this rook, then the white queen actually feasts on this rook in the corner due to a double attack. So this is kind of the essence of chess. The essence of tactics are all these double attacks. And this is kind of the epitome. This is kind of a great demonstration of where all the tactics start flying. And this current position, I actually think Magnus needs to first take care of his king before he gets too ambitious with any traps of his own. I wonder whether that's just dodging, getting the king to a safer square off this diagonal. I wonder whether that's biting the bullet, castling into it, as we say, getting the king hidden on the long side. But either way, this is really, really heating up. And what a start for us. He takes this pawn instead on h4. And now the blue arrow, I'm going to say, it looks like you just want to get to safety with your king. A slow pawn move, Robert? Is that surprising?
Yeah, it's surprising because black has like 5 different options that all look scary for white to handle, including knight on e4 takes knight on c3. So this position is very tricky. I said it before and I'll say it again. I think it's trickier for white just because many of the tactics are seemingly hitting in black's favor, whereas white doesn't have that many threats, just the knight on c6 that can be piled up on. So a3, good luck to you. And I just want to note one more defensive move that black always has is that rook coming up to h6, or in this case, we see the blue arrow, castling queenside. David, that was your suggestion before, and apparently it's the only move that keeps the edge for black.
Oh, castling queenside. It's brave, but it's got to be on his radar. There's multiple threats here, including queen takes pawn on d5, and castling queenside does defend against that. It takes a brave man, though, Tanya, a brave player to just kind of commit the king on a side that is going to be wrecked, ruined in the near future.
This is such a difficult position. It's just so complicated. And to come to a decision right now, it is already a moment where you need to start being precise. As we've seen, queen b3, not an accurate move, but from a practical perspective, it asks questions. I really like this idea that you mentioned, Robert, of actually a rook lift on the king side, because I would hate to destroy that pawn structure on the queen side. I want to go long castle eventually, but whenever you take on c6, you want to recapture with that rook. But the question is, does black have enough time? Can actually black make the move rook h6, just postponing castle for the sake of the structure here, David?
Possible, but I'm reluctant to give up the beautiful d-pawn. The white queen then would be attacking this bishop as well. Like you said, time. I think that is the key word right now. And that's why moves like castle's queenside, kind of long-term, strategically, they're risky. They don't make that much sense, but it's all about saving time. And castle's queenside achieves multiple things in one go. You get your king to safety, Magnus plays it. You protect your pawn on d5, everything at once, and you unpin your knight. Now, big threats of jumping out this way, maybe knight to a5 in the near future. Only now does Fedoseev challenge the black bishop. And okay, this one, it feels like this is going to be decided somehow by a tactical shot, Robert. I'm not sure where, I'm not sure when. It might not be for another 15, 20 moves, but it's that type of position.
There are so many tactics in the air, and one of them is Tanya's idea from earlier. There are knight takes d4 ideas that you have to be careful about. So bishop takes knight on c3 would be my first step, because the e-file, if that knight from the white side gets out the way, there will be a direct shot. So look at Magnus. He scoops up this knight here. Fedoseev, he has to take with the pawn. If he takes with the knight, he loses, and he does just that. But let's talk about an open g-file. Why don't we discuss that? A rook can slide to g8 now or in the near future. If you want to keep your pawn structure intact, I already mentioned a move like rook h6, which not only defends the queen side, but allows you to double on the g-file in a creative way. So I think that you can make multi-purpose moves here if you're Magnus Carlsen. I don't believe in white's attack. I don't think the black king is in real danger. And I think that the scorecard underneath the board here, one exclamatory move from Magnus, castle and queenside, a great reaction. And for Fedoseev, sometimes a question mark, one error. It doesn't seem like a big one, but in a position where you have to be accurate every single turn to keep the initiative, it can show that the advantage heads in one player's way. And in this case, it's Magnus. So I yeah, I don't really know how Magnus is going to respond here. He has several options, but I just don't really believe in any attack against the Black King, Tanya.
He's touching the 4-minute mark, so he needs to make a decision quick because there are still a lot of pieces on the board, and there's still a lot of fight in this position left. I completely agree with you that now White will not be probably given the chance to actually destroy the pawn structure on the queen side. Again, I really like the idea of rook h6, and I think it's just been played by Magnus. Really nice call there. Just a really good concept that, we often think about developing rooks. You want to move them sideways, but rook lifts in these kind of positions can be so multi-purpose. You're thinking about not only defending that knight on c6, but eventually attacking White's kingside pawns. For Fedoseev, his king is feeling very unsafe. I can't imagine a safety on the queen side. The f2 pawn is hanging. King side looks equally dangerous, which doesn't only mean that the king is unsafe, but it also means that the rook on h1 remains out of the game for a really long time here, David.
I don't envy Fedoseev at all. I think the only thing going in White's favor now is the clock. I was going to comment on his camera. He was leaning back for a long time. He looked a bit kind of out of love with his position, and understandably so, but he needs to hustle. Magnus, he's so hard to kind of throw off balance. You see it sometimes, you see Magnus get emotional, you see him shaking his head, but it's so rare. You really have to kind of shock him with a move. Even if it's not the best move, just throw something, kind of throw a spanner in the works, but suddenly it's all lining up and it's not turning out well for White. He's kind of forced Magnus to play a move he wanted. The clock situation is dramatic. Magnus is lower there, but it feels like White's position is so much harder to play than the opponent's. And Robert, I'm trying to find some reason for Fedoseev to get optimistic. I must admit, I'm struggling. Do you see any in this position? Do you think he looks happy at all?
No, he's definitely not happy because he needs to win this game just to stay alive up in the winner's bracket. If he loses, he's still in the tournament. That's the good news. But we saw the Sharks that are down in the loser's bracket. We watched Alireza Firouzja and Yana Palmashi make it through. So it's not like you get to the loser's bracket and suddenly things are easier. And as for the chess, he makes a pawn push, pawn to f3, and we saw the blue arrow. It comes back to us. I don't even think that's the only move here. Like, if I'm being honest, I think that Black has a number of moves that keep him with a huge advantage. And a draw is good enough for Magnus. He's got the odds here. So he could play it safe. He could play aggressively. And of course, Tanya, he finds the best move even when there are 5 different good-looking options.
Magnus Carlsen just always seems to find the best moves in positions. I don't know how he does it, but to me, it looks like it was game 3, which was Fedoseev's big chance. Missing that opportunity with that knight coming back in that knight and pawn endgame. I think it was game 2. I'm sorry, I'm going to correct myself. Game 2 with knight e4 and eventually giving up the knight for that a pawn moving forward. That was a golden opportunity missed by Fedoseev. And against the world number 1, when you miss those opportunities, they come far, few, and rare. It's very hard to bounce back in this match. And now, this position, it's Magnus who's playing for more.
Yeah, I have to agree. And we saw Magnus on the camera kind of shifting position again, frowning, wincing. I think he might be remembering game 2 as well, Tanya. Just these top players, they're such perfectionists. They want to kind of have smooth sailing. They want to have bragging rights over the opponents. But look at this, Magnus suddenly upping the pace. Maybe he was just shifting positions. Suddenly he's going for this white king. And the pawn is going to capture on g2 any moment now. And it's really reminiscent of that game earlier where Firouzja was able to checkmate his opponent with a king out in the open. I really, really fear for Fedoseev's life. Credit to Fedoseev, poker face there on the camera, but after pawn takes g2, attacking this rook in the corner, the white king is going to be shorn of its protection, and there's going to be all sorts of sacrifices in the air. I'm looking at the f3 square, I'm looking at this bishop jumping in later to e4. There are threats on white side. It's all about the clock now for Magnus. Maybe there's a lot to calculate right now, but definitely winning for Black if he can hold his nerve, if he can maintain this level of accuracy we've shown. Robert, White, wow. Okay, gives up the rook in the corner. Do you think we'll see an under promotion?
We have seen it, yes. Yeah, that is always fun to play in a game, and it was necessary, everyone, because you have to count tempo by tempo. If you establish a new queen there, you would lost both of your queens. So he had to take and promote to a knight because it's a check, and then he could save his queen. So just David is showing this would have won for White because both queens would have left the board. So what a find by Fedoseev, and a quick response from Magnus. I think Fedoseev is doing the right thing. When you are in a win or go down to the loser's bracket moment, you need to throw everything at Magnus, and at least we have an imbalance. And Magnus has been grimacing throughout this game. White's king feels a little bit safer. So when there's a lot at stake in each and every game, players do go wrong from time to time. Even Magnus Carlsen, the #1 player of more than the last decade. So as I look at this position, Tanya, I see that Black is well ahead. The evaluation bar, it's not lying to us. But do you see any chances for White just because we do have some material imbalances and perhaps play in a different direction?
The biggest chance of Fedoseev would have been if Magnus had the auto promote to queen turned on in that moment. Zero captured on H1, and that would have changed the game. But an under promotion gets the job done. Magnus Carlsen is up in exchange. He's already up on the scoreline. He is dominating this game from start to finish. It looks like Fedoseev with the white pieces never really got going on the queen side. We see no attack against Black's king. White king still feeling a bit of pressure. The knight falls back. The f4 bishop cannot be given up. But I do see the bishop on d3 lining up with the rook on g6. David, is this more complicated than what meets the eye at first?
I think so. I think, yes, it's complicated, and yes, it's imbalanced. That's the key for Fedoseev. He cannot let it be just a clear-cut, kind of a straight linear variation that Magnus has to work out, and then it's over, and then it's a draw or a black win. He has to make it, as we mentioned earlier, a bit muddy, those waters. He has to complicate the issue, and I do love the white bishops. I'm very biased. My favorite piece, those bishops, Magnus's favorite pieces. I'll give a secret there. But in the meantime, okay, rook to g5, a really classy move. And if rooks disappear, I do fear for Fedoseev then. He's just trying to, again, simplify the equation, Magnus Carlsen. And rook to h6, the bar slides down. Robert, what's happened here? Is this a necessary kind of gamble by Fedoseev? What has he missed?
It is. Yeah, he knew that if he traded rooks, he had no winning chances, so he'd rather lose. He wants to go down swinging. The black knight can step back to e7. Trades clearly favor Magnus Carlsen, who's ahead by material, and has the safer king. So you're removing defenders from the white side. So it gets a question mark because objectively it was a bad move. It hands Black a winning advantage, but you have to do it because the draw is a loss. So I think that he made the right decision, and what in the world is that?
Wow. Double question mark, Magnus Carlsen. What's he missed? Is he just trying to simplify things? He's not losing. Evaluation bar says still better for Black, but yeah, I see the look of shock on your face.
Yeah, I just saw the eval bar rise up. We see that it's a blunder. It looks like a stunning move. The idea is clear, right? If White was to pick up the knight on d4, he wants to take the knight on f5. You recapture with the bishop. The queen jumps onto the game. It still looks incredibly strong for Black with the rook so active. The queen on f5, the bishop on g3, not really getting the job done. And look at this. The computer says the best move for White is actually not to grab material to allow the activity, but actually just to push the pawn on f4.
Must be what Magnus missed, Robert.
Well, I think it is hilarious that the best move here is not even to take the sacrifice material, but just to push your pawn to shut in your own bishop. But that shows how sad Fedoseev's position is, and that actually means that Magnus' decision, it deserves exclamation points, not question marks. Because what is f4 here? He might play it, but where are the winning chances possibly going to come from for
Robert,
Vladimir
no
Fedoseev?
one's playing f4 here. I'm sorry. Nobody's playing f4 here.
What was that?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that was commentator's kiss. I'm putting it on that.
David, are you as surprised as Tanya that he played f4?
Yes, I'm glad, Tanya, you jumped in before me. One more second and I would have said the same, so don't worry. And f4 is such an ugly positional move, but it's based on tactical reasons. The rook is trapped. And I think this is what Magnus underestimated. This is why we saw the bar sink. Even the world number one is human. He didn't spot in advance that the rook could actually be left on this square. f4 is a really classy move. But ultimately, as the computer's pointing out here, king to b8, the blue arrow, showing that Black is still fine. You just need to shuffle into the corner. Always step towards the corner if you castle on the long side. If you castle queenside, good tip for everyone. But still, this is uncomfortable. I'm going to say for Magnus Carlsen, 40 seconds on the clock, a trapped rook. Suddenly, for the first real time since we jumped in here, the nerves are going to be jangling. Magnus, he's going to try and focus. He plays the best move. Of course he does. It's the best for a reason, but it's going to be uncomfortable. He's got to untangle. This piece is a big problem long term. And Robert, he's going for it now, Fedoseev.
And Magnus must have some kind of attack against the white king. And the problem is the queen can't jump over the rook. So I'm looking at rook takes f4 check, some kind of sacrifice of the rook to go after the white king. They're not my pieces, so I can give them up and take it back. But Magnus, he's down under 20 seconds. He needs to find something because Fedoseev was threatening to win material.
Wow, and suddenly he goes for that idea, Robert. He's given up a whole rook, Magnus Carlsen, but he's gambling. He's got 20 seconds left. Now Magnus is a whole piece down. Wow, suddenly this is turned. He's living life on the edge, the world number one. Fedoseev, this is his opportunity. He drops back his king. That was a check. Now the black rook surely is going to dive into the position. And Magnus stakes a high 15 seconds.
Oh,
so he's
my
lost
gosh.
control. He has lost control, Magnus. He needs a miracle
Under
to
10
hold this.
seconds now. And the good news of Fedoseev is that the bishop can block the check on the second rank, so you don't end up losing material. And there's no back rank ideas because the knight is defending. Instead of the rook check, Magnus gives a queen check, but white is up a whole piece right now. You could also snap up the knight on e7.
It's a piece for 3 pawns, and the white king is out 1 or 2 seconds and barely got his moves off. So I see the evaluation. White is favored. That is clear, but it's still within that drawing territory for Magnus. He is mad, but Fedoseev is locked in, trying to find a way to go after the black king, or maybe to checkmate on the back rank was threatened. A queen sacrifice from Vladimir.
Oh, that was beautiful. Let's just backtrack very quickly. One move. Rook takes queen was not a good idea because white would have landed a back ranker, a back spanker here. That would have been checkmate. So queen g5. He's going for the endgame, Magnus Carlsen. To take or not to take? What do we think? Should he keep the queens on the board?
It's a tough one. Do you try to attack black's king on the queen side? Where do you find the entry point? He decides not to trade. Moves are coming in fast and quick.
Fast here. White's king is weak, so normally you would want to trade off queens, but Fedoseev needs to win. He cannot risk the game fizzling out towards a draw. Again, Magnus begging for the queen trade, and he's still fighting. Evaluation bar says only small advantage here for white. It's all about the pawns, Robert. He's lacking pawns right now.
And great understanding. No surprise there from Magnus Carlsen. If the queens come off, he says, I can hold, because a pawn chain is as strong as its base pawn. Without the queens on the board, it's difficult for white to make inroads. So we see another queen trade being offered, but Magnus does need to be a bit careful. There could be a moment where he offers a queen trade at an inopportune time and thus allows white to transition into a nearly winning ending. So for now, he has everything under control. Tanya, I don't see how white makes progress here.
Well, he's moving the king. He's saying, I want to trade on my terms where the king will find a nice spot on d4. The good news for Fedoseev, it's very hard for Magnus to get rid of the c5 and the a3 pawns. As long as the pawns are on the board, white will have good winning chances. The king is advancing from a5 to b6, locking down Magnus's rook on the 8th rank to stop checkmating ideas. Magnus can't allow white's king to b6, steps up with the rook. 1 pawn's picked up. I think Fedoseev is going to get the job done in this one. I see the eval bar is equal, but David, practically, it's got to be really difficult to hold.
Got to be difficult to hold, but the big question, does Magnus Carlsen believe in fortresses? We've heard the answer a million times. He originally said no, but he is relying on one right now. The black king stops the white king from coming in, and if you hold your line, maybe it's tough. Okay, check now, trying to deflect the white king away. He's trading pawns. He's getting the job done. Magnus, I was agreeing, Tanya. I thought white had great winning chances, but not against an endgame genius like Magnus Carlsen. Suddenly, black is getting closer and closer to safety. All he needs to do is eliminate the remaining white pawn from the board. And Robert, it looks like he's done everything right, Magnus.
Although Fedoseev still has chances, because we do know that if all 3 of black's pawns come off, there's no way Fedoseev is going to make a draw by repetition here. He's going to play on until the very end because he does have an extra piece. So yes, rook and bishop versus rook, everyone, theoretical draw. But when you have no time on the clock, good luck to save it. But for now, I mean, Magnus is not giving any ground, David.
Building up time on the clock as well. Magnus had 1 or 2 seconds a while back. Suddenly Magnus is up at 15, 16 seconds. He's really upped the pace, really upped his game. And Fedoseev, he'll rue another missed opportunity if this one slips away. He won a piece. He tricked Magnus in that time scramble. But suddenly, look at the black rook just lining up, pinning or attacking, harassing the white pieces. And okay, we see the final white pawn disappear. So this is a draw, even if black loses his remaining 2 pawns. But that is difficult. And the black king is caught on the edge of the board. So there will be checkmating patterns. Let's predict now. Will Magnus hold? It might be difficult, but will he do it?
I'm going to predict a big yes on this one. I mean, what the position was and what he's managed to get, just his resourcefulness in this endgame has been just incredible to watch. Putting that king on a7, it felt like a fortress, then at the right time, managing to exchange, trade off those remaining white pawns. And now for Fedoseev, he's got to try to push this position, but Magnus has enough time on the clock. Robert, I'm predicting this one to end in a draw. What about you?
And of course, should be a draw, but look at what Fedoseev is doing. Magnus's king is caught on the side of the board, and if Magnus ever has to push his pawns, then those pawns become weaker. Magnus looks bored. He's like, I can do this in my sleep. But what Fedoseev, he's determined, and this could be a type of position where white does get the upper hand, takes one pawn, then the second, and then you have to prove it over 50 turns. For everyone at home, 50 moves without a capture or a pawn push results in a draw, and that's what Magnus is relying on. In fact, when was the last pawn push? Does anyone know?
A long time ago. We'll go back and count. I think the last capture was a bunch of moves ago, 15, 20 moves already. So Magnus is getting closer. It's the old Captain America line. I could do this all day. He's defending really resolutely here. And he's got his king off the edge of the board. Look at this diamond formation, the black pawns and king here. But going to hold these pawns together, that's for sure. Fedoseev, he's got a few more moves, Robert. As you mentioned, he's got to win one of the black pawns or push them forward, force them, provoke them forward in order to keep the game alive. He's running out of time, though, both on board and clock. Not making any progress. Surely now, as we reach 100 moves, this one is edging closer to the draw.
So hard to beat Magnus Carlsen. It's unbelievable. It reminds me of the Toronto finals where Magnus against Fabi, he was down a queen and he managed to win that one. And here he was down a piece and it looked like Fedoseev did everything to get his chances. He struck when it mattered, and then eventually Magnus, just with his resourcefulness, manages to hold this endgame. The pawns haven't moved. One hasn't been captured. We are getting closer to the 50 move. And it looks like it might not even go into a rook bishop versus rook.
Dare I say it? This is a fortress, and there's been no way for Fedoseev to make progress because the rook on c4, it defends and prevents the white king from joining the party. So what a hold from Magnus, but what play from Fedoseev. He should hold his head high even if this game ends as a draw and he goes down to the loser's bracket, because if one little move went differently, he could have tied this match, and maybe if a couple things had gone a different way, he would have tied it earlier and had some different chances.
And
Now
Robert,
the countdown begins. 10 more moves. 10 moves to get to the 50 move rule, and it will be a draw unless white wins a pawn or one of the black pawn moves. Tanya, I think he's... Wow, just before it happens. Pawn to d4. Why did Magnus break the formation? He got impatient on the brink of a draw.
Wait, that was a bad choice.
He just had 8 more moves to go.
He's making his moves with half a second on his clock. Look at his time. He's barely getting his moves off, and he's dropping his pawns.
Wow. And Magnus knows it. He's not happy with his decisions. One pawn goes, the 50 move has been reset, and Fedoseev, chances are back.
Just as we were saying, he's on the brink of a draw. It was the 10-move countdown. If he did nothing for 10 moves, it would have been over by now. But it's the clock. It was the panic. It was just that restless desire to do something, the human nature. And now suddenly, this black pawn in the center is not going to survive that much longer. It might get corralled. It might get surrounded at some point. The black king will be driven away. Still a lot of work to be done. But now Fedoseev, he's going to be gaining in confidence. Look at Magnus. You were right, Robert. Just every move he's getting off with 2-3 seconds left. He's really feeling the nerves now. He's only human after all.
And another song lyric dropped in there from David. I appreciate you. But I think that the white king, it needs to get active, and Magnus still doing a good job of keeping the white king tethered to the bishop, not allowing it to cross the third rank. So Tanya, I mean, the move counter, it started again on move 117. We are currently on move 138. Are we going to see that pawn drop off, or is Magnus going to be able to hold this position and not allow any more trades?
He's got to try and do it. But it was really surprising how he let the move counter reset with that move d4, lost the pawn. Fedoseev has to look for his chances to win that d4 pawn and then try and fight it in a rook bishop versus rook. The main idea is to push Magnus's king into some kind of a mating net. But step one has to be to grab that d4 pawn. But the first question, how do you even bring the king out of that second rank situation that Magnus has trapped it into? David, do you see progress for White's king here?
I see progress with a helping hand, but unfortunately, again, you're playing Magnus Carlsen, and he is a marathon man.
Oh, whoa! Magnus
no.
Carlsen lost on time! Are you kidding me?
No way. Oh my goodness. Magnus Carlsen gets flagged.